She might not have a nose, but Bumblebee has the sassiest personality. We love her to bits. She's an absolute angel. Bumblebee arrived on our doorstep in a cardboard box with a lovely, lovely person who'd found her in his garden, and he had assumed that she'd been attacked by a monitor lizard. He'd found Bumblebee the next day, missing her nose, essentially. So he picked her up, whisked her straight into the clinic, and we got her in for assessment almost immediately. Monitor lizards are absolutely huge, and at this point Bumblebee was this big, so really she's so lucky to have only lost her nose. I don't know if something disturbed the monitor lizard, or actually knowing Bumblebee now, she probably fought him off with her sassy personality. But yeah, she is lucky that she survived that. A lot of animals don't. We do lose a lot of puppies, a lot of kittens, especially to monitor lizards. It's a very common occurrence in Sri Lanka. So we were just lucky at this stage that Bumblebee had only lost her nose. With the injury that Bumblebee had, she was immediately a critical patient. But when you tie that in with the fact that she was so small, around 3 weeks of age, she immediately went to the top of the list of our most critical patients in the hospital. We could see that really, you know, the most pressing concern was that she was struggling to breathe. What was remaining of her nostrils had actually closed over. It was kind of scabby, gunky, nasty material. And she actually was really struggling to breathe because at the same time she was crying so much through her mouth that she couldn't quite work out where to breathe from. She was obviously in pain, but I also think she was probably really quite distressed because where's her mum? She's on her own. Goodness knows when the last time she fed was. So we jumped into action trying to ensure that Bumblebee could breathe appropriately, and what that meant was securing access to the nostrils. So we started cleaning off all of the gunk, picking it off because it was really caked on there, and then we could see that there were tiny holes there, but because Bumblebee was so tiny, these holes were extra tiny. In an adult dog, this wouldn't have been this difficult, and if we couldn't have secured access here, we also would have access here. But in a dog as small as Bumblebee, you know, doing anything around the airways in the neck or the back of the throat is also extremely tricky. And so we had to improvise at this point. We created our own homemade stents. So essentially we used the outside of an IV catheter, and then we stuck those into the nostrils, somehow secured them with a little bit of tape and super glue, and they were her airways overnight until we could work out a plan of action going forwards. They were our homemade stents, and actually she tolerated them really quite well. So of course Bumblebee needed bottle feeding. She was a tiny baby, and on her first feed she was absolutely ravenous. She almost had a kind of pause on the bottle, just really going at it. And when animals are as little as Bumblebee, they do need round-the-clock supervision. So from a medical perspective, but also from a compassion, a love, a caring perspective. And so Bumblebee then became the we care puppy that would go home with a staff member every night and get cuddles all night long, be woken up every couple of hours to have her nightly feeds, and to be just monitored throughout this whole ordeal, really. We did that with a lot of cuddles, a lot of feeding, and as a result, we created an absolute monster. She's such a diva, and she would just have to cry once and we'd be there with the bottle, you know, on demand. Yeah, a lot of work went into those initial stages with Bumblebee, getting her through that first bit before we then could come up with a longer term plan in terms of reconstruction of her face. Of course, that wasn't something we could address while she's still growing. With Bumblebee being that age and being as vulnerable as she was, but then adding in this horrific injury to her nose, we knew we were really up against it in terms of keeping her alive to the point where we would even have that luxury of working out how we were going to reconstruct her face. So our homemade stents in the nose did not last as long as I would have liked. We were having to replace them every couple of days because despite having a buster collar on, we had to again make one of those because Bumblebee was too small for a normal buster collar. But she would just pull these things out. They were annoying her. And so I wanted to keep those in longer term, to be honest with you, but she was having none of it. The reason I wanted to keep them in longer term was, one, of course, to make sure that that airway was nice and clear and that she could breathe, but also to maintain that airway so that once she got a little bit bigger, we could start increasing the size of this stent and ensure the nostrils were going to grow with Bumblebee. So if we didn't keep that hole open, the body will try its best to close what it deems to be a wound. So at this stage, the nose is a wound to the body. So it's working overtime to close, and we need to open as Bumblebee grows. That hole needs to be helped along with getting bigger and bigger. So I wanted to keep the stents in for a lot longer than I was able to in the end, because she was just having absolutely none of it. But fortunately for us, her body did play ball. We would put them in from time to time just to give the nostrils a little bit of a stretch, and that seemed to do the trick rather than having them in 24 hours a day. So we found some kind of compromise between my stubbornness and Bumblebee's stubbornness. Bumblebee was going from strength to strength. She was becoming this boisterous, sassy little girl. She wasn't having any issues with breathing. Her nostrils were staying open. She didn't seem fazed by it at all. And so the decision at that point was made to actually see if we could rehome her as she was, with a view to reassessing her later down the line to see if we needed to do reconstructive surgery once she was fully grown. We thought it was going to be such a challenge to rehome Bumblebee because she would need a very, very special owner who could see beyond her physical disfigurement and see the true personality of Bumblebee. And one day, thankfully, this person just came into our world and it was absolutely amazing. Bumblebee ended up being at the hospital with us for around 3.5 months, which is a long time, and it is long enough that we created an absolutely incredible bond with this little girl. It's impossible not to when you're hand rearing puppies, honestly, because they are reliant on you for everything. You become their mum. We had really mixed emotions about letting her go. Of course we did. You know, we knew that she'd come of age. She was being sassy. She was ready to go out into the world and learn manners and learn how to behave herself and not be the diva that she was becoming. But we also were really sad because we were letting go of this tiny thing that we'd all bonded so incredibly with over the course of the previous 3 months. It's a long, long time to be with a patient. And it's one of my favourite things about the job, actually, is that we do get to bond with patients. As a vet in the UK, I might see my patients for a maximum of 3 days in their entire life. Here at WeCare, we really are getting to be with our patients all the time. We're getting to bond with them, to know them, to understand them, and it's an incredible aspect of vetting with street dogs that I just now don't think I could live without. I don't think that I could be a vet and not have these incredible opportunities to get to understand my patients a little bit better. Bumblebee had a couple of weeks in her new home before she was then due for a checkup. So she came into the hospital and it was like she'd never been away. Everyone flocked out of the prep room to come and be like, Bumblebee's here! And everyone just wanted to look at her growing. She was in great condition. She was in great spirits. Her nose was looking fantastic. And it was looking as though, honestly, at this stage, reconstruction might not be necessary. She was coping really, really well, but I wanted to just put in a few more checks so that we could be absolutely sure. And so a couple of months later, I made a little surprise visit to her home to have a little look at her nose. When I arrived, I went up to the gate. Bumblebee went mental. She did not recognize me at all. It was like I was this intruder that had come into her home. It took me lying on the floor, just putting my hand underneath this chair that she'd decided to hide under, for her to realize, oh, it's you. And then she came out, but that probably took a good 5 minutes before she realized who I was. So not gonna say that that didn't sting, it definitely did. But after that, she could not get enough of me. She was absolutely all over me, had boundless amounts of energy. And I was tearing around the garden with her. I wanted to tire her out a little bit just to see how she coped with exercise, if she had any intolerance to it, if she was struggling to breathe, if there was more respiratory effort. But she was totally normal. She handled it like a champ. And by that point, I'd wound her up to the point of no return. I could not get her to calm down. She was trying to chew my nose off by the end of it. But it was absolutely amazing to see. And at that point, kind of made the decision that I don't think we need to do anything here. If we were going to reconstruct her nose, it would be for aesthetic purposes only, not for functionality. She was doing incredibly well, and so we decided to leave it there. She's completely loved by her owners, completely spoiled. She still gets to be a diva there. From seeing Bumblebee arrive as this tiny, tiny, helpless puppy, honestly on the verge of death, to then seeing this absolute ball of energy tearing around the garden, being absolutely indulged by the owners, indulged by us, it was the most heartwarming feeling, and it just gave me such a reminder of why we put in the hours, why we put in the hard graft, and why we give dogs like Bumblebee a chance. And thank goodness she grasped that chance with everything she had. She put in so much fight as well, and you can see it in the character that she is today. She's a fighter, and she deserves to be here, and we're so, so, so glad that she is.